On a chilly, late autumn afternoon in Manhattan, the mocking laughter of Hassan al-Mansouri, the 48-year-old oil tycoon, echoed throughout his opulent penthouse like the roar of a predator reveling in victory over its prey. 9 languages? Haha. This boy can barely speak English. The sneer was aimed directly at David Johnson, a 14-year-old boy and the son of Hassan's office cleaner. David stood there, small in stature, dressed in worn-out clothes and a frayed public school backpack, but his eyes held a startling resolve that clashed with the burning shame on his cheeks. This public humiliation wasn't just a personal moment. It was a snapshot of a simmering class war, where power and disdain were laid bare. You won't believe how this conversation turns into a battle for dignity and truth. If you've ever been underestimated, this is your story too. Let us know where you're watching from. We read every comment. Beside David stood Grace Johnson, his 42-year-old mother clutching a mop bucket with trembling hands. She knew she had made a terrible mistake by bringing her son to work. In a volatile economy, especially after the shocks of the pandemic, keeping a stable job to support 2 children without a husband was a daily battle. For Hassan al-Mansouri, owner of a $3.5 billion empire, it was a rare moment of amusement after weeks of stress in the global energy markets. The idea of a black boy, the son of a janitor, claiming to speak 9 languages when Hassan doubted he could finish reading a single English book was, to him, the perfect form of entertainment. Economic analysts often note that those who reach the peak of power can become trapped in the cage of their own success, where complacency distorts their perception of true human worth and the origins of talent. "David, please apologize to Mr. al-Mansouri," Grace whispered, her voice heavy with years of endurance and the overwhelming fear of losing the only job keeping her family afloat. But Hassan waved it off. "No apology needed," he said, a satisfied grin on his face. "I want to hear more about this fantasy. Go on, child prodigy. What are those 9 languages?" David took a deep breath. At 14, he had already learned that the world often judges people like him and his mother before even attempting to understand them. The child of a janitor, black, living in the impoverished Bronx, these were all labels people like Hassan used to justify their contempt. He knew this wasn't just a conversation. It was a silent battle against deep-rooted societal prejudice, the kind of invisible barrier millions of young people from marginalized communities face every single day. English, Spanish, French, German, Arabic, Mandarin, Russian, Italian, and Portuguese, David replied calmly. Each word came out with such clarity that Hassan actually stopped laughing for a moment. It was a chilling pause where the arrogance of a billionaire met the sharpness of a young mind. "Lies!" Hassan declared, returning to his Italian marble desk. "Grace, your son has a serious imagination problem. Maybe you should take him to a psychiatrist instead of bringing him here." Grace bowed her head, feeling the crushing weight of a familiar humiliation. For 5 years, she had cleaned this office, endured degrading comments, and accepted a low wage because she needed the job more than anything. But watching her smart, steadfast son be mocked like this cut deeper than any personal insult she had ever endured. "Mom," David said softly, touching her arm. "It's okay." Hassan observed the gesture with a cruel smile. He relished these moments of absolute power when he could remind others of their place in the social hierarchy. He had built his empire not just through business acumen, but through a calculated ruthlessness, willing to crush anyone who dared challenge him. In the brutal world of finance and geopolitics, maintaining an image of dominance was a survival strategy, and Hassan had mastered that art. "You know what I think, Grace?" Hassan leaned back in his $15,000 leather chair. "I think your son is jealous of my executives' children, the ones who go to elite private schools. So he makes up these fantasies to feel special." "Sir," David interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying a dignity that caught Hassan off guard. "Do you speak Arabic?" Hassan frowned. "Of course. It's my mother tongue." "Then you'll understand when I say, أو سأقول الحقيقة, أو سأقول الحق." The silence that followed was terrifying. Hassan stared at David, processing the flawlessly spoken words in classical Arabic. This wasn't the kind of basic Arabic any tourist might memorize. It was a complex structure with advanced grammar and perfect pronunciation, a testament to linguistic mastery well beyond expectations. Grace looked back and forth between her son and Hassan, sensing that something had shifted in the air, though she didn't understand what David had just said. Where did the boy learn that?" Hassan asked, for the first time in years, genuinely unsettled. David smiled for the first time since entering the office. "At the public library, sir. They offer free language programs every afternoon." Hassan felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, a mix of surprise and what might have been respect. Yet his rational mind immediately rejected the thought. No, that's impossible. He just memorized a few phrases. "Anyone can memorize a phrase," Hassan said, trying to regain control. "That doesn't mean the boy speaks the language." "You're right, sir," David agreed. "That's why I brought this." David opened his worn backpack and pulled out a document that made Hassan's throat tighten. It was an official certificate of multilingual proficiency issued by Columbia University, with scores showing fluency in all 9 languages David had listed. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was irrefutable proof, a direct challenge to Hassan's beliefs about the origins of intelligence and opportunity. "That's fake," Hassan stammered, but his voice no longer held its previous confidence. David pulled out another paper. "This is my certificate from the Advanced Linguistics program at the City Library, and this one is from the online parallel translation course I completed last month." Hassan took the documents with trembling hands. They were all real, stamped and signed by reputable institutions. This 14-year-old boy, the son of his janitor, had reached an academic level on par with professional diplomats. It wasn't just shocking. It was a brutal blow to Hassan's perception of value and social rank. How could a kid from the poor Bronx with limited resources have overcome the invisible barriers society had built? "How?" was all Hassan could whisper. What he didn't know was that David Johnson had a secret much bigger than just speaking 9 languages. And that secret was about to shatter everything Hassan thought he knew about intelligence, merit, and the true worth of a human being. This secret wasn't just about David. It was a mirror reflecting the raw truth about Hassan himself, about how he had built and maintained his empire on a foundation of false assumptions. Ever been judged before they even knew your name? If that hit close, hit subscribe and share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. Hassan examined the certificates for several minutes, desperately searching for evidence of forgery. But the more he looked, the more his arrogance morphed into something close to panic. The signatures were real, the seals official, the dates aligned with a 3-year academic timeline. "That still doesn't prove anything," Hassan muttered, speaking more to himself than to David. "Anyone can take online courses." "You're right," David agreed with a calmness that only made Hassan more unsettled. "That's why I brought this." David pulled a tablet from his backpack and opened a video chat app. Within seconds, the screen showed an Asian woman in an academic office. "Professor Chin," David said in flawless Mandarin, "would you please confirm to Mr. Al-Mansouri my performance in your business translation course?" The woman on screen replied in fast, fluent Mandarin. Hassan didn't understand a word, but he could hear the natural flow of the conversation. The complexity of the grammatical structures, the ease with which David shifted between linguistic nuances. This was a masterclass in language proficiency, undeniable and complete. "Mr. Al-Mansouri," the professor switched to English. "David is the best student I've had in 15 years of teaching. At age 14, he speaks Mandarin as fluently as a native of Beijing. The boy is extraordinary." Hassan abruptly ended the call, his hands slightly trembling. "Grace," he said, his voice oddly strained, "did you know about this?" Grace shook her head, still trying to grasp what was happening. "David has always been smart, sir, but I didn't know—" 3 years, David gently interrupted. "I started when I was 11. My mom worked 2 jobs to pay for private school, but she lost the second one because of the pandemic. When I went back to public school, the classes were too easy, so I decided to use my free time for something useful." Hassan felt a tight knot forming in his stomach. While his own children attended the most expensive schools in New York, With private tutors paid by the hour, this boy had outpaced any education money could buy, using nothing but a public library and extraordinary determination. This wasn't just a shocking truth. It was a stark contrast between two worlds, one of privilege and one of relentless grit. "But why languages?" Hassan asked, genuinely curious for the first time. "Because I want to understand the world," David answered simply. "And because I realize that when you speak to people in their own language, they stop seeing you as a stranger and start seeing you as human." The comment hit Hassan like a punch to the gut. For years, he had used his Arab heritage as an excuse to distance himself from his American employees, citing cultural differences when the truth was simply pride. David had struck a deep nerve in Hassan's armor, a truth he had buried long ago. "David," Hassan said slowly, "you're only 14. "That's impossible, son." David smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. "Impossible is just what hasn't happened yet." Hassan turned to Grace for the first time in 5 years. He saw a woman who had raised a genius while doing menial work, someone who had sacrificed everything to give her son a chance. It was a moment of revelation, a glimpse into the hidden power of maternal strength and sacrifice. "David," Hassan said, his tone shifting, "why did you come here today? Your mother could lose her job." David exchanged a glance with Grace, who gave the slightest of nods. "Because I overheard your phone call yesterday," David said calmly. "You were discussing a contract in Arabic with investors from the Middle East, but you made mistakes that could cost millions of dollars." Hassan turned pale. "What kind of mistakes?" "You used the word Mubashir when you should have used Fari for urgency, and you confused Mirak with Mirab when discussing the timeline. Those small errors completely changed the meaning." Hassan sank into his chair. The investors had seemed confused during the call, but he had blamed it on the connection. In reality, his language blunders had nearly sabotaged a $50 million deal, a massive number even for a billionaire. This wasn't just a personal misstep. It was a textbook example of how crucial linguistic precision is in international business, where a single wrong word can alter the entire fate of a negotiation. "How did you know I made those mistakes?" Hassan asked. "Because I've been studying business Arabic for 2 years, David replied. "It's my specialty." Hassan looked at David with new eyes. This child was a specialist in international business communication at age 14. "David," Hassan said slowly, "you saved my company without me even realizing it." "Actually," David said, pulling another document from his backpack, "I did more than that." Hassan took the paper. It was a detailed proposal for restructuring the company's international communications, identifying linguistic errors that had cost them contracts, and suggesting specific solutions. It was a deep analysis, on par with a report from a top consulting firm, but it had come from a boy not yet 15. "You analyzed my company," Hassan whispered. "Just public information," David explained. "Press releases, transcripts, online documents. I found error patterns that explained the lost deals." Hassan read it twice. It was brilliant, detailed, and worth hundreds of millions in recovered contracts. "Why did you do this?" Hassan asked, bewildered. David took a deep breath. "Because I wanted to show you that value doesn't come from your parents' money. It comes from what you can contribute." Hassan felt something crack inside him. For years, he had believed success was inherited, that intelligence was a class privilege. This boy had shattered that belief. It was a moment of worldview collapse, opening a doorway to deeper truths about the nature of talent and fairness. "Hassan al-Mansouri," David said, calling his full name for the first time. "May I ask you a question?" Hassan nodded. "If a kid like me can do this using only a public library, what could others like me do with the opportunities your children have?" The question hung in the air like a ticking bomb. What Hassan didn't know was that David's performance was just the opening act, because hidden inside that worn-out backpack was a recording that would prove Hassan had lost. Million-dollar deals not because of language skill gaps, but because of something far worse, and David was about to use that evidence in a way that would forever shift the balance of power in that office. Hassan was still processing David's heavy question. when the boy pulled out one final item from his backpack, a small digital recorder that made the billionaire's blood freeze. "Before I answer your question," David said calmly, "I need to show you something." He pressed play. Hassan's unmistakable voice filled the room. "These black Americans are all the same. Lazy, uneducated, and always blaming others for their failures. That's why I only hire Arabs and white people for key positions." Grace covered her mouth in horror. Hassan turned pale. Where did you record that?" he stammered. "In the elevator last week," David replied flatly. "You were speaking to your vice president about hiring policy. You didn't realize I was there." Hassan remembered it clearly. He had been riding down with Robert Chun, arguing about why they hadn't promoted any black employees to executive roles. He had thought it was just the two of them. "That's illegal. You can't record private conversations," Hassan exploded. "New York is a one-party consent state," David replied coolly. "Perfectly legal. And considering it captures systemic racial discrimination, I'm sure the Department of Labor will be very interested." Hassan felt the world spinning. A recording like this could destroy his company, lead to multi-million-dollar lawsuits, and permanently ruin his reputation. This wasn't just legal evidence. It was a ticking time bomb, exposing a much deeper social issue about fairness and ethics in business, a problem that many large corporations had already paid dearly to confront. "What do you want?" Hassan whispered. David smiled, but it wasn't a child's smile. It was the smile of someone who had planned every move in this chess match. "I want you to choose," David said, stepping up to Hassan's desk. "You can keep believing people like me and my mom are beneath you, and this recording will land on the desk of every journalist and labor attorney in New York." Hassan swallowed hard. Or you can prove you actually learned something today. I want you to promote my mom to facilities supervisor with an $80,000 salary. I want a scholarship program for underprivileged youth, and I want you to hire me as a junior language advisor." "You're only 14, Hassan protested. "And I speak 9 languages better than any adult you know," David shot back. "Plus, I've already proven I can save your company millions." Hassan looked at Grace, who had remained silent but whose eyes shone with pride and a dignity he had never noticed before. "Grace," Hassan said, his voice cracking, "you raised a genius." "I raised a man," Grace replied firmly. "A man who knows his worth and won't accept being treated as less." David pulled a contract from his backpack. "I've prepared the terms. You have 5 minutes to decide before the recording goes public." Hassan took the contract with trembling hands. It was detailed, professional, and included clauses protecting both David and Grace from any future retaliation. The boy had thought of everything. "How do I know you won't release the recording even if I sign?" Hassan asked. "Because unlike you," David said, locking eyes with him, "I believe in giving second chances to those who truly want to change." Hassan read the contract again. The demands were fair, even cautious, considering the value David could bring to the company. But signing meant admitting he had been wrong about everything. "What if I don't sign?" Hassan asked, though he already knew the answer. David pulled out his phone. "The recording will be sent to the New York Times, CNN, and the Attorney General's office in exactly..." He checked his watch. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. "You're blackmailing me," Hassan said. "I'm delivering justice," David corrected him. "You've spent years benefiting from a broken system. Now you have a chance to be part of the solution." Hassan looked out the window at Manhattan, the city he had conquered with a mix of intellect and ruthlessness. But this boy had just outplayed him on both fronts. "Grace," Hassan said gently, "do you accept the promotion?" Grace looked at David, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I accept, sir." Hassan picked up his solid gold pen and signed the contract. "David Johnson," he said, "you just taught me the most painful and most valuable lesson of my life." "What lesson?" David asked. "That real intelligence doesn't lie in where you're born or how much money you have. It lies in what you do with the opportunities you create for yourself." David put away the recorder and extended his hand to Hassan. "Welcome to the 21st century, Mr. Al-Mansouri." Hassan shook the boy's hand, sensing that he was agreeing far greater than a simple employment contract. He was agreeing to see the world through a completely different lens. At that moment, David did something no one expected. He pulled 2 more recorders from his backpack. "Just so you know," David said casually, "everything that happened here today was also recorded, including your voluntary signing of this contract." Hassan laughed for the first time in years. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but one of genuine admiration. "You're frighteningly smart." "No," David smiled. "I'm just better prepared." Hassan believed he had just learned the most important lesson of his life. But David had one final surprise that would reveal not only the extent of the boy's planning, but also a secret from Hassan's own past, one that would change everything the billionaire thought he knew about his origins and the true meaning of merit. 6 months later, Hassan al-Mansouri sat at a round table in the Bronx Public Library, surrounded by young people from underserved communities participating in the scholarship program David had demanded. The man who once saw public libraries as symbols of failure now viewed them as centers of true educational excellence. "Mr. al-Mansouri," asked Maria, a 15-year-old Latina girl, "is it true that David got his first job at 14 by blackmailing you?" Hassan laughed sincerely. "Yes, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me." David, now 15 and officially the youngest language advisor in American corporate history, sat at the adjacent desk reviewing international contracts worth millions of dollars. In just 6 months, his revisions and proposals had generated $200 million in new revenue for Al-Mansouri Industries. "Tell us the whole story," Maria urged. Hassan looked at Grace, now dressed in elegant business suits as a facilities supervisor and one of the most respected executives in the company. She smiled, encouraging him to go on. "6 months ago, I was a wealthy but miserable man," Hassan began. "I thought my money made me superior to others. Then David taught me that real intelligence has nothing to do with where you're born, but everything to do with what you do with the chances you make for yourself." "But how did he know it would work?" asked Carlos, a 13-year-old now studying programming thanks to the scholarship program. David looked up from the contracts. "Because I studied Hassan for months. I discovered that he grew up a poor immigrant in Lebanon, came to the U.S. at 16 without speaking much English, and built his empire from scratch." Hassan nodded. "David reminded me that I had forgotten my own roots, that I had become exactly the kind of person who discriminated against me when I was young." "And now?" Maria asked. "Now our company is the most diverse in the industry," Grace answered proudly. "We hire talent based on ability, not last name or zip code." Hassan stood and walked over to a wall displaying certificates of the first 50 recipients of the David Johnson Young Talent Program. "Do you know what the greatest discovery I've ever made is?" "What is it?" they all asked in unison. "That when you invest in talented people, regardless of their background, they don't just grow, you grow too." David closed his laptop and joined the group. Hassan al-Mansouri had every opportunity in the world, but he nearly missed the greatest one of all, the chance to become a decent human being. "What about you?" Carlos asked David. "Weren't you afraid of failing?" "Of course I was," David admitted. "But my mom taught me that the greatest failure is accepting to be treated as less than your worth. I'd rather risk everything than remain invisible." Hassan looked at David with sincere admiration. The most impressive thing wasn't that the boy spoke 9 languages or had analyzed his company. It was that he dared to stand up to a powerful man, knowing it could cost his family everything. "But you had a plan, right?" Maria pressed. David smiled. "There's always a plan and always evidence to back it up." Grace stood. "Time to go, David. We have a meeting with the Japanese investors in an hour." Hassan turned to the young people. "Want to know the best part of the story? David now earns more money than I did at his age. Not through inheritance or privilege, but through pure merit." As they walked toward the company car, a Mercedes that Grace now drove as an executive, Hassan reflected on the complete transformation of his life. "David," he said, "I have a confession." "What is it?" "You didn't just save my company. You saved my soul." David paused. "What do you mean?" "I had become a monster. Wealthy, powerful, but completely empty inside. You forced me to remember that real success is using your privilege to lift others up, not push them down." Grace kissed her son's forehead. I'm proud of you, son, not because of the money or the recognition, but because of the man you're becoming. And I, Hassan added, am honored to have learned from both of you that family isn't about blood. It's about the people who make you want to be better. That afternoon, during the meeting with the Japanese investors, David simultaneously translated the negotiations that led to a $500 million deal. Hassan watched, remembering the day he had mocked that very same boy. After the meeting, a Forbes reporter approached them. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, how does it feel to be the first billionaire CEO with a 15-year-old advisor?" Hassan smiled. "It feels like I've finally understood what leadership really means. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about recognizing and nurturing the intelligence of others. And you, David, what advice do you have for other young people?" David thought carefully. "Never let anyone define your worth based on how you look or where you come from. Your background does not determine your destiny. And always have evidence to back up your claims." "One final question," the journalist asked. "Do you believe this story can inspire others?" Grace answered, "This story proves that when you combine talent with opportunity and courage with preparation, there are no limits to what's possible." Hassan nodded. "David taught me that real wealth isn't what you accumulate, it's what you build. And the smartest investment you can make is in human potential." David's story proved that true intelligence knows no race, class, or age. Hassan had tried to use his wealth to humiliate those he saw as beneath him. But he discovered that he had vastly underestimated the power of a sharp, well-prepared mind. He learned that true power doesn't come from the money you have, but from the people you choose to invest in, and that sometimes the greatest lesson of your life comes from the person you least expect. Thanks for watching. Every view, every comment helps push back against the silence. Keep the conversation going. Subscribe and stay tuned for more real stories.